Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The biometric lock on the safe hissed, a sharp intake of breath in the silence of the penthouse, turning green as it accepted the fingerprint Julian had lifted from a wine glass only hours before. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 45th floor, mirroring the storm raging inside Julian's chest as the heavy steel door swung open, revealing the stacks of bearer bonds, the black ledger, and the velvet box containing the piercing blue siren's tear diamond. His hands didn't tremble. Rage had a way of steadying the nerves that sorrow would have shaken apart. He wasn't just taking the money. He was taking Cashin's leverage, his power, and the very heart of his empire. Outside, the gala was still in full swing, a celebration of the merger between the Draven Corporation and the immense wealth of the Valetti family. A union sealed by Cashin's engagement to a woman who wasn't Julian. Julian shoved the ledger into his waterproof bag. "You wanted a transaction, Cashin?" he whispered to the empty, cold room that had been his prison and his paradise for 6 months. "I'm closing the account." 6 months ago, Julian Vane had been nothing more than collateral. He was a man of refined tastes and soft edges, an art historian with an eye for forgeries, and a father with a gambling addiction that eclipsed the sun. When the debts came due, Julian's father had vanished, leaving Julian to face the sharks. But the sharks didn't come. The Leviathan did. Cashin Draven. The name alone was enough to silence boardrooms and back alleys alike. He was a man carved from marble and malice, possessing a beauty that felt dangerous to look at too long. When Julian was dragged into Cashin's office, bruised and defiant, he expected death. Instead, Cashin had looked him over from behind a mahogany desk that cost more than Julian's lifetime earnings. "Your father owes me $7 million, Cashin had said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. "He is gone. You are here." "I don't have the money," Julian had snapped, lifting his chin. "Kill me and be done with it." Cashin had stood then, unfolding his tall, powerful frame. He walked around the desk, the predatory grace of a panther stalking a wounded bird. He stopped inches from Julian, tilting Julian's chin up with a gloved finger. "I don't waste assets, Julian. You have an eye for detail. You spot fakes for a living. My organization acquires many artifacts. You will authenticate them. You will live in my home. You will work until the debt is paid. And if I refuse, then I find your father, and I peel him apart." It was a contract signed in coercion, but life in Cashin's penthouse was a gilded cage that Julian found himself strangely comfortable in. The dynamic was clear, master and servant, debtor and creditor, but the lines blurred in the quiet hours of the night. It started with the art. Julian would be in the library, examining a Ming vase or a Renaissance sketch under a magnifying loupe, and Cashin would watch him. Not with the cold calculation of a boss, but with a burning intensity that made the air thick. "It's a forgery," Julian said one evening 3 months in. He pushed a painting away. "The brushstrokes on the collar. The pigment is too modern." Cashin moved closer, leaning over Julian's shoulder, trapping him against the desk. The scent of expensive scotch and sandalwood enveloped Julian, making his head spin. "You are very good at seeing the lies," Cashin murmured, his breath ghosting over Julian's ear. "It's my job." "Is it?" Cashin's hand moved, covering Julian's on the table. His thumb brushed over Julian's knuckles. "Tell me, Julian, am I a lie?" Julian turned his head, their faces inches apart. The tension was a pulled wire, humming, ready to snap. "You're the most honest monster I've ever met." Cashin chuckled, a low, dark sound. "Careful. Monsters bite." But he didn't bite. He kissed. It was violent and desperate, a collision of two worlds that should never have touched. Cashin kissed him like he wanted to consume him, and Julian, starved of affection and drowning in Stockholm Syndrome and genuine attraction, kissed back. That night changed everything. The debt was no longer mentioned. Julian moved from the guest room to the master suite. The cold, sterile penthouse began to feel like a home. Cashin, the man who supposedly felt nothing, would return from brutal business meetings and bury his face in Julian's neck, seeking an anchor. "Stay with me," Cashin had whispered one night, after a particularly bloody takeover where he'd come home with bruised knuckles and a haunted look. "Don't leave. I'm not going anywhere," Julian had promised, running his fingers through Cashin's dark hair. "I'm yours. Remember." "Mine," Cashin had growled, tightening his grip. "Only mine." Julian fell. He fell hard, believing that he had tamed the beast. He believed that the looks they shared across crowded rooms meant something. He believed that he was no longer a debt, but a partner. Then came the Draven Valetti Gala. It was the social event of the season. Julian was dressed in a suit Cashin had tailored for him, a midnight blue velvet that hugged his slender frame. He stood by the champagne tower, waiting for Cashin to finish his speech, expecting, perhaps foolishly, that tonight Cashin might acknowledge him publicly. Or at least, acknowledge him privately with that soft look he reserved for the bedroom. Cashin stood on the podium, looking like a god of war in a tuxedo. "I have an announcement," Cashin's voice boomed over the speakers. "To secure the future of this company, and to unite our families in a bond of unbreakable strength, I am proud to announce my engagement to Elena Valetti." The applause was thunderous. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The glass in his hand shattered, slicing his palm, but he didn't feel the pain. Elena Valetti walked onto the stage, a vision of classic beauty, old money, and social acceptability. She took Cashin's arm. Cashin looked down at her, and for a split second, his eyes flickered to the back of the room. To Julian, the look wasn't apologetic. It was cold, resolute. Julian stumbled out of the ballroom, his heart fracturing into 1,000 jagged shards. He was intercepted in the hallway by Cashin's head of security, a man named Voros. "Mr. Draven wants you to go back to the penthouse," Voros said, his voice flat. "He said to wait for him." He said, "Business comes first." Business. That's all Julian was. An asset, a mistress, a toy to play with until the real players came to the table. Julian nodded, a strange calm settling over him. "Of course. Tell him I'll be waiting." He returned to the penthouse. But he didn't wait. Julian knew Cashin's passwords. Cashin, in his arrogance or perhaps his blind trust, had never hidden them when Julian was in the room. He knew the safe combination was the date Julian had moved in, a sick sentimental token that now felt like a mockery. He opened the safe. He took the liquid assets. He transferred the offshore accounts to a labyrinth of shell companies he had created weeks ago, just in case, using his knowledge of the art world's money laundering techniques. He stripped the penthouse of its liquidity. As he packed the bag, he paused by the bedside table. He took a pen and wrote a note on the linen stationery. "The debt is paid. The interest was too high." He left the ring Cashin had given him, not an engagement ring but a promise ring, on top of the note. Then, Julian Vane vanished into the rainy night, taking $50 million and a broken heart with him. The chase did not begin immediately. That was the most terrifying part. Julian fled to the coast of Portugal, to a small, whitewashed town called Azenhas do Mar, perched on the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic. He rented a small cottage under the name of a deceased painter. He didn't spend the money. He didn't touch the diamonds. They sat in a floor safe under a rug, a radioactive pile of wealth he couldn't bring himself to look at. He spent his days walking the cliffs, letting the sea spray sting his face, trying to wash away the memory of Cashin's touch. Weeks turned into months. The paranoia began to fade, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that he didn't miss the luxury. He missed the man who had lied to him. One evening, for months after his escape, a storm rolled in from the ocean. The power grid in the small town flickered and died. Julian lit candles in his small living room, the shadows dancing on the walls. A knock came at the door. It was 3 sharp raps. Precise. Authoritative. Julian froze. He knew that knock. He grabbed the fire poker from the hearth, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He walked to the door, his hand trembling. He opened it. Cashin stood in the rain. He looked like ruin incarnate. His suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes dark hollows of exhaustion. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was alone. "Hello, Julian," Cashin said, his voice hoarse. Julian gripped the poker tighter, raising it. "Get out." Cashin didn't move. Water dripped from his jaw. "You're hard to find. You buried your digital footprint well. I taught you too well. I said get out." Julian shouted, the anger flaring up, hot and bright. "I have the money. It's in the safe. Take it and leave me alone." Cashin took a step forward, crossing the threshold. He didn't look at the floor safe. He didn't look around the room. His eyes were locked on Julian's face as if he were a starving man looking at a feast. "I don't want the money," Cashin said quietly. "Liar." Julian backed away, hitting the edge of the sofa. "You chose her. You chose the merger. You chose the power. You made me look like a fool, Cashin. You made me love you. And then you discarded me like a fake painting." "I chose her," Cashin interrupted, his voice rising, cracking with an emotion Julian had never heard before. "Because the Valetti family put a hit out on you." Julian froze. The fire poker lowered slightly. "What?" Cashin closed the distance, heedless of the weapon in Julian's hand. He stopped inches from the iron tip. "My board found out about us. The Valettis found out. They said I was compromised. They said my weakness was the appraiser in my bed. They threatened to kill you to clear my head." Cashin reached out, gripping the hot iron of the poker with his bare hand, ignoring the burn, and gently pushed it aside. "I agreed to the engagement to buy time," Cashin rasped, his eyes searching Julian's. "I had to make them believe I didn't care, that you were nothing. I had to be cruel to save your life. I was going to dismantle them from the inside, but I needed you safe. I needed you away from the blast zone. You should have told me," Julian whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "And put a target on your back?" Cashin shook his head. "I couldn't risk it. But then you magnificent, vindictive creature. You robbed me blind." A ghost of a smile touched Cashin's lips. "You crippled my liquidity. You actually made the Valettis back off because they thought I was insolvent. You saved yourself, Julian. You did exactly what I would have done." "I hated you," Julian sobbed, the fight draining out of him. "I know." Cashin wrapped his wet arms around Julian, pulling him into a crushingly tight embrace. The cold water from Cashin's suit soaked through Julian's shirt, but the heat radiating from him was scorching. "I deserved it. I deserved every bit of it." "I still have the money," Julian mumbled into Cashin's shoulder. "Burn it," Cashin said, burying his face in Julian's hair, inhaling deeply. "Throw it into the ocean. I don't care. I have more money. I can build another empire. I cannot build another you." Julian pulled back, looking into those obsidian eyes. He saw the fatigue, the fear, and the raw, unadulterated love that Cashin had always tried to hide behind walls of ice. "Why didn't you come with guards?" Julian asked. "Why come alone?" "Because," Cashin said, cupping Julian's face with trembling hands, "I didn't come here as your creditor. I came here to beg." The great Cashin Draven, the Leviathan of the city, slowly sank to his knees on the wooden floor of the cottage. He looked up at Julian, total surrender in his posture. "Come home, Julian," Cashin whispered. "The engagement is off. The Valettis are dealt with. The debt is gone. Just come home." Julian looked down at the man who had owned him, then loved him, then betrayed him, and now knelt before him. The power had shifted. Julian wasn't the debtor anymore. He held the currency that mattered. He dropped the fire poker, clattered loudly on the floor. Julian reached down, tangling his fingers in Cashin's wet hair, and pulled him up. "You're going to catch a cold," Julian said softly. "Is that a yes?" Cashin asked, hope flaring in his eyes. It's a negotiation, Julian corrected, pulling Cashin into a searing kiss that tasted of rain and forgiveness. And this time, the terms are mine. And that is how the asset bankrupted the boss, only to buy him back. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bring a tyrant to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Cashin? Or would you have kept the millions and stayed vanished? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,